we're only a couple of weeks away from the official start of the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season, and forecasters are saying that people should be prepared for a potentially hyperactive hurricane season ahead. In this video, I'll be showing you my 2024 preseason forecast and why this season looks frightening. So, the first problem is that the Atlantic Ocean is on fire. Sea surface temperatures are near record high levels in a lot of areas, especially across the main development region and the tropical Atlantic and even the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. You have temperatures, I think, about 5 degrees above average. So that's very highly above average. There's this whole area where you have above average temperatures, and that's even 5 degrees doesn't sound like much, but it is, like, because once you get above 80 degrees, which is enough to support a hurricane, every time you go up a degree, that's a significant amount of additional energy there to intensify a hurricane. And once you're in the mid 80s to near 90 degrees, that's pretty concerning. And this is just the sea surface temperatures. You already have temperatures above 80 degrees in this whole entire area. You have most of the Gulf is already favorable for hurricanes, and all the Caribbean and the tropical Atlantic, and it's still warming up because we're not even into summer yet, and the warmest temperatures usually happen in the Atlantic around September. And it's not just at the surface. You have 80-degree waters go down. At least, this is showing 100 meters in some areas, so that's 330 feet. And so it goes down pretty far, so you have a lot of heat energy stored up in the ocean for these hurricanes. And these are in areas where, over the past few years, there haven't been a lot of hurricanes. So that really, adds up that heat for years and years. And then this year, I think, we'll see a lot of hurricanes going through this area, and that's not good. Because this is the ocean heat content. This is just kind of showing how much heat energy is there in the ocean. And yeah, we're already at like 100, 125, especially in that Caribbean area. It tends to pile up there a lot. And the thing is that there hasn't really been a lot of hurricane activity there for a really long time. Like last year, there was no Caribbean activity. And really, this area hasn't really been affected by hurricanes in a while. And so you're really adding up all this heat energy. And so then, at some point, when you do get a hurricane that goes through there, it has so much energy available to rapidly intensify. That's not good, because there's a lot of heat energy here, and guess what? It's worse than it was in 2020, which was the most active hurricane season on record in the Atlantic. And we have more upper ocean heat content now than we did in 2020. That's legitimately terrifying. And the ocean temperatures are going to stay above average through the hurricane season. And so, yeah, it's looking pretty bad. And that's the first problem. And then, guess what? We're going into a La Nina, which is the cool phase of the ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. That impacts the hurricane season. We're going, like, we've been in an El Nino, and now it's going down pretty quickly to a neutral. We're already in a neutral, and you see these very cool anomalies showing up, and we're going to quickly go into a La Nina this summer. This is just kind of over the past couple months. Those cooler waters have really surfaced off the coast of South America, and then moving into that ENSO region in the Eastern Pacific. And this is the Climate Prediction Center. They think that, yeah, there's going to be a La Nina pretty soon in the next couple months. And during the hurricane season for sure. And this is just another model showing this. We could get to I'm thinking a weak to moderate La Nina, probably a moderate La Nina in the main part of the hurricane season. And this is kind of just their outlook, their thinking that, yeah, by the main part of the hurricane season, definitely about a half a degree to a degree below average in that Enzo region, which is a weak to moderate La Nina. And if you get a weak to moderate La Nina, that lowers the wind shear over the Atlantic, because in an El Nino you're going to have more activity in the Pacific, but it suppresses activity in the Atlantic. You have more shear, especially over the Caribbean, and also it impacts the steering pattern too, because in an El Nino, storms get steered away from the U.S., and there's actually a chart showing that hurricane landfalls in the U.S. go up during a La Nina. They're highest during a weaker La Nina. They're lowest during a strong El Nino. And that's kind of what happened last year. We're in an El Nino, which does tend to limit hurricane activity, but the Atlantic was record warm. So we did have quite a few named storms, but in general, just slightly above average activity. But pretty much, there was only Idalia was the only storm that actually hit the U.S. as a hurricane. There were a lot of storms that were steered away from the U.S. And so but this year is a totally different story, and this is looking pretty bad. And so we have the really high sea surface temperatures and the ocean heat content, and we also have a La Nina. So all these favorable conditions for hurricanes to form, to have even more hurricanes and have them strengthen and potentially rapidly intensify. And then also the steering pattern is going to push these storms towards the Caribbean and the U.S. And so these are some of the models. This is the CFS model showing already by June, you actually have a lot of rain, not necessarily tropical storms, but this is at least showing rain. And so there's that. But then going forward, shows July, August, not a ton of activity, but this is the CFS. There's other models that are a lot more concerning than this. And it does show activity in the tropical Atlantic and also in the Caribbean in August and then September. But especially over the Caribbean area, I think, definitely pretty likely to have activity there. And then October, November, yeah, this model, it doesn't look as concerning as some of the other models, which I think are probably more accurate. And it does show below average shear, though. It shows less than 10 knots of shear pretty much on average, especially in the Caribbean, probably below average shear, especially July. It's looking way below average, and then kind of near average in a lot of places. This is the CANSIPS model. This is pretty concerning. This is showing already in June you have way above average precipitation. This isn't indicating exactly, tropical storms or hurricanes. This is just showing rain. It can represent where there will be a lot of activity, though. And so it's showing definitely over the Caribbean. It does look really concerning. And this is pretty bad. In July, it shows what could be a very active hurricane season early on in the season. So it's like July, August, even September, this keeps going, and then it does seem like after like October, then it does get pushed away to some extent, but you do have a lot of storms still in the Caribbean. But this is wild how much activity it shows in the Caribbean. If and considering those sea surface temperatures being way above average, you already have all that upper ocean heat content. That looks bad. And this continues even in November. See what happens there. And this is the NMME model, the North American Multi-Model Ensemble forecast, showing the same thing, a very, very active looking, especially going off all the way, from the coast of Africa with these tropical waves going all the way into the Caribbean and where it really explodes. It looks pretty bad. And then the Gulf Coast is definitely in on this activity. Even the Carolinas also, but this is even going into August, especially now it goes over towards Florida and also Louisiana and Mississippi, but just in general the entire Gulf Coast, but especially Florida. I think there's pretty much no way Florida doesn't get hit this year. But also, then this is in September. You do have some of those storms, kind of fish storms, that do recurve away from land, like they did last year. But then you also have a significant amount of Caribbean activity. So I think that there could be some of both, but especially looks like earlier on in the season, some of the models are really showing this activity focused towards the Gulf Coast and the southeastern U.S. and especially the Caribbean. So this looks pretty bad. So you're wondering, like, how many storms there actually are going to be? Well, this is my hurricane forecast for the season. It's 2024 Atlantic Hurricane Season Forecast. This is a preseason forecast. I'm already thinking 24 tropical storms, like anywhere from 20 to 28 storms, but especially probably around 24, 8 to 15 hurricanes, probably, about 12, and 4 to 9 major hurricanes. Now, the record number of major hurricanes was 7. So we could go over that. Definitely. This looks pretty bad. And so probably around 6 major hurricanes, but last year we had 19 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. The average is 14, 7, and 3. I think there's an 80% chance of an above average season, a 15% chance of a near average season, and a 5% chance of a below average season. And this is just the preseason forecast. I think that there could be even more activity. If we see that, and that we're going to go way above this, we could have even more activity than this. But this is just, the preseason kind of forecast. And, usually people don't want to go overboard with the preseason forecast, but it tends to go up as we see, some of that activity going on. This is a map that I created showing what areas I really think are at the biggest risk of seeing hurricane activity this season. And we have, the Caribbean especially, very high. This map in the yellow is low, orange is moderate, red is high, and then the purple is very high. And so I think that, the Caribbean in a very high chance of seeing a lot of tropical activity, especially these hurricanes. And this goes all the way through the Caribbean, especially Jamaica, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. These are, all places that could see a lot of significant activity. And also, of course, Florida and even Louisiana, they could definitely get impacted. And then in the high zone, also the rest of the Caribbean, the Yucatan Peninsula, Texas, the entire Gulf Coast is in a high risk of hurricane activity. And also the Carolinas, like the coast of North Carolina especially, does tend to get hurricanes because it's sort of a projection. But yeah, I do think that they'll see a high chance of hurricane activity, and then the moderate kind of just extends across an even larger area. But yeah, so that's kind of the map that kind of shows what areas I think are the most likely to see significant hurricane activity this season. And now you also could be wondering, what about the Eastern Pacific? Well, the Eastern Pacific is really not impactful as much to, like, you can get some storms along the coast of Mexico, but most of the storms actually just go west and don't do anything, so it's mostly fish storms. But the thing is, I do think that this one is going to be inactive because of the La Nina. That does reduce hurricane activity in the East Pacific, and the entire, like, this is showing a pretty intense La Nina on this forecast model, and it cools the entire Pacific. It goes below average, which is, pretty interesting to see. So I think that it's going to be pretty inactive there. This is kind of my prediction, just 12 to 17 tropical storms, probably around 14, 6 to 8 hurricanes, about 7, and 1 to 4 major hurricanes, maybe 2 major hurricanes. Definitely not as active as last year with all those major hurricanes that did occur. So it was above average there. And this time I think a 60% chance of a below average season, 30% chance of near average, and 10% of above average. It might not even do that. But these are kind of just the models showing the East Pacific. It's definitely not exciting looking. You could have some activity along the coast of Mexico, but really a lot of fish storms with that, and there is a lot of shear because of the La Nina. There's another look at that, kind of really not much, and this is really showing a well below average precipitation, in this region. So we could have even less activity than what I put on that chart. Yeah, there could be some activity, especially Central America. Sure, there could be some activity, but really not much for the Eastern Pacific. But the Atlantic is looking very concerning. Definitely the Caribbean, Florida, the Gulf Coast, the southeastern U.S., especially the East Coast. Yeah, I think that those areas could definitely be impacted this hurricane season. So, if you're in those areas, you should be prepared for that. Have your hurricane plan in place. And yeah, thanks for watching this video. Please be sure to like the video, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more weather updates, especially during hurricane season. Extreme Weather Zone out.